So this discussion we're going to be having over the next 1 hour is going to be about the one-on-ones of A/B testing. It is not going to be about the details of ins and out. How do you go into statistics? How do you go into cascading experiments, stuff like that, which are more advanced topics. My job here is to help all of you get a one-on-one understanding of the space so that you go from, hey, A/B testing is a rocket sciencey thing that smart PMs do. From there, you go to a point, hey, I understand what it is. I can debate about it and I know what to learn and how to go deeper into this, right? That's my goal essentially over the next 45 minutes or so, right? So basically get you enough fundamentals in your head so that you can start diving into the space in your jobs as PMs, or be able to spar with your senior folks around you to understand this field better, right? So that's going to be the high level guardrail. All right, so without further ado, getting into it. Sure, I think this is the first myth that I wanted to burst before we go into the details, right? So when you talk about A/B testing, especially for folks who are already around in the PM profession, when you talk about A/B testing, generally people end up thinking about as test is a way to test UI optimizations, right? You must have heard this old joke where Google was testing out different shades of blue for their search button, which was a great example of A/B testing, as a joke. But then people end up simplifying it to just that, right? Hey, A/B testing kar rahe ho, is it just about testing UI, right? In reality, that's not the case. A/B testing, or rather experimentation, is an approach where you can actually use it to validate any product idea. It may not be about a UI optimization. It could be about testing a new way to do something which is already out there, or testing a different proposition altogether, right? So that's the piece we want to burst throughout this conversation, that don't you yourself should not think of it as just a incremental tool to help you test out minor ideas, or also actually a tool which can help you test out very deep bets across your career, right? Now I'll show you a couple of proofs of how big companies actually leverage this way. So I don't know if guys have noticed, so Twitter has been testing out things, right? So this is one of the core new features, where they were trying to test out the privacy settings. Now, this was again an experiment from them, right? If you look at it, this is not a UI experiment. This is a core feature experience experiment. And how the way they did was roll it out to only a select set of people and see how they react to it, see how the network reacts to it, and then decide whether they want to roll it out to more people once they have gotten confidence on whether people are accepting it in the long term, right? This is one example from Twitter. There's another example from Instagram where they were trying to change how you see likes, right? So if you remember, there was one art, they've not obviously pursued it anymore, but one of the core ideas was how if you hide the count of likes and comments, do you have a more natural reaction to content? You're not biased by the existing reaction on the content, right? Again, not a UI idea. This is a very core product strategy experiment. But if you think about it, if they would not have tested this, they would just rolled it out. Obviously, this had caused a dramatic uproar in the community, because this fundamentally changes what Instagram is. And secondly, if you do not, and if you don't want to do that, then it's too risky for them to try in the first place. So what they did, they actually tried it out with a select set of people, and then they essentially figured out, hey, this is not aligning with the way they want to operate, and they decided to kill it or whatever, right? So there's another example. The third example is from Pinterest. So I specifically pick big brands so that generally the myth is around, hey, the experimentation is something used specifically the big brands to test out minor things here and there. So that's the myth I wanted to bust, that all the big brands actually are leveraging the idea of scientific experimentation, which ends between the common lingo end up calling A/B experimentation, to build confidence on the deep product idea. So this one is from Pinterest, where they were trying story pin wala idea. The theme being that Pinterest has always been about pinning some interesting image or content from the web. If we give people a way to capture content in the way Instagram allows you to capture stories, will it increase engagement? Will it increase content creation? Will it open new kinds of content creation on the platform, right? So again, another good example of experimentation. So the last one I want to just talk about here is this interesting quote that always sticks to my head when I'm talking to any business leader about experimentation and why we should invest into this. Where this from this interview with a Spotify leader, where essentially he summarizes as a way to confront your ideas in the real world, right? So it's not about questioning whether or not you should do this idea. So generally, if you talk to very seasoned old leaders, they would end up saying, hey, if you're confident in that, just go for it. Why do you want to experiment on it? Right? We'll see if it busts out, right? Now, the whole theme here is, boss, sure, you might have the best idea in the world, but are you able, do you have enough, how should I say, enough humility to test that idea in the real world and then decide whether or not you have a good idea or is a bad idea? I think that's the crux of applying this mentality that, yeah, I have confidence, but I want to confront it in the real world in a setting where I could be proven wrong or right without any dramatic impact on the entire business. So I think that's the basic mentality that this scientific tool ends up driving for you, which allows you to confront multiple of your ideas without breaking the product or the business metrics, and then lets you figure out the gem across all your ideas, right? So I think that's the piece I wanted to kind of put across to all of you guys before we kind of even talk about what is A/B testing. Awesome. All right, then going into um, what is A/B testing for people who have never heard of it before. It's essentially a scientific way to measure the actual impact of any product change by showing the change only to a small set of randomly selected users and then comparing it with the behavior users have not shown the product change, right? What does that mean, right? What it means is um, you want to make a change on any product layer in your ecosystem, right? Whether it's content, whether it's color, whether it's a way the feature works, whatever, right? The traditional way to do this was, hey, let's launch it to all of the users and see if something goes wrong, or if everything goes well, we'll see the net impact and just go with it, right? That's a traditional approach. Or the other approach is, hey, let's launch it in one city. Let's see ki kuch, as they like to say in colloquial PM terminology in India, फट तो नहीं रहा है. And then अगर नहीं है, sure, let's roll it out, right? But the problem that happens there is you're never able to gauge exactly the impact that your work created, right? As early stage career PY, I saw there a bunch of SPMs here as well. I'm sure all of us come to a point where you have to justify, fine, I launched 5 ideas or 5 changes in the product ecosystem, which had the impact on paper, which did not blast off when we rolled it out. But what was my actual impact of my work over the last quarter? That is something we end up struggling with, right? So experimentation is what allows you to do that, right? Because if you're gauging your impact by rolling out your change to all the users, yeah, you made a change in a checkout flow and you rolled it out. First, you rolled out to one city and rolled it out to all the users, and then suddenly Diwali came across, right? And the whole ecosystem, whole product flow changes. Like you suddenly have a ton of traffic coming in with a high intent to buy, and then you'll be saying, oh wow, my conversion rate across the old checkout flow in August or September was X. Now in October, November, it's 5X, right? And that's probably because I rolled out my new feature. Is it true? No, because the way the way you're measuring impact, that itself is changed, right? Because you're comparing it with a different time frames where the product your users and the environment that they're using the product in itself has changed. So that's the bottom line. How do you actually figure out the actual impact of your product work is what this whole approach helps you define in a scientific manner. We'll cover the science part later in the presentation, but bear with me until that. Cool. From a visual perspective, assessing that this is what it boils down to. That if this is your entire user base, how can you split your users in these, let's say, kind of buckets? So imagine each of the circle as isolated set of users, and the colored circle is essentially different experiments that you're running, right? And all of these 2 circles are existing in the same point of time, right? So coming back to checkout one example, imagine these circles being existing at the same time in October when you launched out your new checkout experience, and then you're comparing the checkout metrics with the new experience that is circle blue, for example. Let's say the blue circle, which has your new checkout users in blue circle who have your new checkout experience versus users in the control group is in the old checkout experience, but comparing their usage of the product, the checkout experience, the metrics, quality feedback, all of that in real time in the same time frame. This is what will help you understand the true impact of your work, and not just aggregate impact of work, which could be driven by how the outside environment is changing over time, right? So generally, when looking at beta, we essentially end up, if you're running multiple, this is something you'll end up with, having multiple of these small ecosystems where you have a control group, where essentially people are not seeing that change, an experiment group, which are people who are seeing that change, then you're comparing their impact against each other, right? Cool. One variance here to keep in mind is it's not necessary that you have just one variant. You could also have multiple variants to an experiment. So imagine you're trying to change the search algorithm on your product. So you could have two versions of the search algorithm running in real time, and then you're comparing both of their, let's say variant A may you made a major change, and variant B may you made some additional minor change, and you want to compare which one is better for us to roll out. So in this kind of a setup, you can actually test, you can create 3 user groups independent of each other, and then test their, compare their usage search performance against a control group, which are not seeing either of the experiment. Pretty standard, right? Nothing too fancy about this, right? Cool. Right. I think part B that I wanted to cover, part A was essentially how do you end up segmenting? How do you end up cohorting people to run experiments? The part B is how do you analyze the difference in user metrics that I was just talking about. So here, essentially, the approach, the one-on-one approach is think in this fashion. For your experiment, and this applies to any product feature as well, not necessarily just for A/B experimentation. What is your primary success metric? Are you trying to drive more conversions? Are you trying to drive more engaged users? Are you trying to drive more activated users? Whatever it is, right? So that is your focus. It could be multiple. Generally, for a good experiment, you only focus on one primary success metric, and the reason for that is that if you're trying to change too many metrics at the same point of time with a single experiment, you might not end up with clean results, right? So a good practice there is, if you're focused, if you're convinced that your idea is good and I want to try it to understand its true impact on my audience, let me first focus it around one metric. Let me make sure that I fully optimize that metric and then move on to optimizing the other metric, right? So that is one key important thing to keep in mind. The piece that people forget to notice is looking at the additional outcome metrics, right? So one example here could be, if you're looking at orders placed, you're doing something on the checkout, on the, let's say something on the your e-commerce product, you're making some change based on the homepage or on the campaign structure, and your primary success metric, you see, am I able to get an uplift in orders placed, right? So you keep focusing on that as a primary success metric, but the other metric that you also keep an eye on is, let's say in this case, time spent on the app, order cancellation, organic referrals, because like any other product work, these are the metrics. Let's say your orders placed increases, but what if it comes at a cost of order cancellations? You're increasing orders placed by 20%, but your order cancellation shot up by 50%. Why? Because whatever hack or whatever change you have done is making people place orders with the wrong configuration, right? Or they're placing orders for SKUs that they thought is something else, or for a different price that they thought from the offer construct, right? So the key part is, when you're looking at analyzing experiments, one needs to compare both. So this is on the right, essentially is a screenshot of an actual experiment, screenshot of a dashboard of an actual experiment at Big Basket, where if you see, primary goal is the primary success metric. So I was doing some change on the address creation step. So this is a step where you map your home address for the order delivery. So I was trying to make it more, so instead of a form-like approach, I was trying to make it more dynamic, more map-like approach, where you can just use GPS to figure out your home location, and then the whole step becomes a 2-second step, right? So even though we were looking at primary metric was complete funnel, how many people are able to fill up their address quickly, right? That we saw a 43% increase there, as you can see, right? But then we are also seeing, in one of the additional outcome metric was, what are the failure rates, or you can call it any outcome metric, counter metric, check metrics, whatever. But then when we look at the failure rates, we realize, oh, there's a significant increase in the failure rate as well, as you can see here. So is this a good experiment? Is this a good feature work? Is this a good product work? No, because you've shown top of the line work, but you're also losing a lot of people. So in the next iteration, what we did, because we closed this experiment, because now we can, it's not a full user rollout. We close this experiment, say, hey, let's figure out the errors. Kyun ho raha hai? Let's bring this number 31% down to less than 5%, actually ideally zero. And then let's relaunch the experiment and see what we end up with, right? Acha, I not that's Reacher, unfortunately. So when we rerun this experiment with the fixes for the errors, and it was some very minor, stupid fixes that we did, then we saw this number go from 43% to 75%, right? So that's the beauty of experimentation. It lets you understand the true impact on your primary success metric, your additional metrics, and correct them in a controlled fashion. Because think about it, I would have launched this entire feature to all the users, and we would have seen, oh, wow, conversion rate overall has increased, but errors has increased dramatically. Then I would have been on fire to solve these issues on production in real time. I would not have the luxury to solve them with patience, with focus, before committing, and doing a fine job on it, right? So this is the second piece to keep in mind. But all that stuff we discussed sounds great in theory, right? But as you transition into PM roles in different organizations, or you upskill, you move up the ladder in your current organizations, the one piece a couple of things that you keep hearing about experimentation, especially in Indian landscape, is first one being, hey, are you really sure about trying this super risky idea, right? Or are we not confident enough to ship this new ideas to all the users in one go? Or the last one being my favorite, if our KPIs didn't improve after launching the idea to all the users, it's just not a good idea, right? Now, all of these thoughts will come across from folks who have never understood the value of experimentation. They would think that, okay, if you've got an idea, it needs to be good, right? And that is a myth, right? No one, not even the best CEOs in India or on the planet, can have a great idea, can have every idea of them could be, amazing, right? It would have contingencies, it will have assumptions, the things you need to test, right? So these are things I would recommend that you be aware about, that the moment you start discussing risky ideas with your organization, they'll end up with one of these excuses that, hey, why do you need experimentation? Kya tumhe confidence nahi hai, right? Or they would say, once you've launched it, hey, this idea is bad, right? This is where you fight. This is where your maturity comes. You can know, you know what, even though I'm very confident, I want to test it. For the first 3 more questions, I want to test it. I want to see, and if not, come in from different angle. Hey, I want to see where it can fail and fix it so that I can take the impact from 2x to actually 5x when you roll out to all the users, take it those kind of angles. Third one, wherein people just kill the ideas very instantly, is again a situation where they don't allow to understand that in a tech world, every idea is complex and multiple implications. Until you understand all the nuances of it, you should not kill it, right? That's the way to handle the third one. So essentially, if you're set this kind of maturity, you'll be able to spar with your executive and say, boss, let's not try to treat our ideas as something we know fully about. Let's actually let our customers tell us what is the right thing to do. And if it's still failing, this system will allow us to take a step back and fix and then try another bet before we commit to it fully by rolling out to all the users. Awesome. This is another piece that I forgot to mention earlier. And even if you are able to convince them on all the other parameters that, hey, मुझे confidence है, but I want to optimize impact, या फिर अच्छा KPI भी नहीं अच्छा आया है, लेकिन I know how I can improve it further. If I had an A/B experiment set up, the final argument would be, hey, we don't have enough engineering bandwidth to run the experiment, right? They're like, go figure. I don't have money, I don't have engineers, how can I run the experiment? That is where I'll cover that in a bit, but that's also a myth. You can solve it. I'll cover a couple of approaches for you based on which stage of organization is. There are very approaches to solve for it. I'll cover that in a second. But this is interesting part, right? Organizations remain in that kind of mindset, and what happens in the end? At the end of the quarter, none of the folks have clarity on what ideas help which KPIs. Everyone just look at the final metric. Acha, orders placed is quarter mein 10% improve हुए. क्यों हुए? No idea, because we lost 5-6 features. हो सकता है one feature had positive impact, another feature negative impact, the third feature zero impact. Once they were rolled out to all the users, but everything is blended together. right? So this is very difficult to map the which work helped us, which work did not help us, which PM had a great thinking, everything gets mixed up, right? This is the end result of not having a scientific approach to, um, instead of experimentation, let me call it scientific way to understand the impact of your ideas and testing ki kahan pe suboptimal and where we can improve it. This is the end result of it, right? The second piece, there is you have a fantastic idea, but because there was some goof up when you launched it, people get very scared, and that idea never gets to see the light of the day. Right? This is again second downside. And the third thing is the long-term cultural thing that comes in. That once you have this couple of big failures, and when you launch out features to all users, the organization starts to not want to do high risk, high reward ideas. Right? Then, if you're a founder yourself, you should be scared because then your organization will only be stuck in that incremental, red ocean space, right? You will not be able to enter the blue ocean where once you try to dramatically crazy ideas, Amazon is a good example, right? Amazon always been trying blue ocean ideas, AWS being one, right? Where they tried crazy ideas, then they will break it out. But if you don't have an experimentation approach, the culture and the comfort to run crazy ideas, you'll be stuck in the red ocean where you just fighting for pennies and dollars here and there, right? Cool. Again, this is just a rehash on how experimentation actually helps you out. The first one being the exact KPI, exact impact of your work. And then if things go wrong, you know exactly which piece of recent, which part of the recent change that you did was behind it. And finally, helps build a culture for you and the organization to allow high risk, high reward ideas to come out, right? A good example of this could be, let's say you want to try something, a crazy integration on the payment step, right? And payments is generally a very flaky step. If you touch it, if anything goes down, the whole business KPIs go down in a second, right? So those kind of places where those are typical example of places where experimentation allows you to try ideas which, if they work really well. But if they go down, they have a tremendously negative impact on your product metrics, right? So this is how it is. Finally coming to the circling back to the argument कि hey, हमारे पास पैसा नहीं है, engineers नहीं है, कैसे बनाओगे? We are not like a Swiggy or Flipkart. You're a small organization which is 15 engineers. How will we build this out, right? Now here's a fact, because I've seen this thing a couple of times, right? Fact is, if your team has built any product, any industrial product of any complexity for that matter, you literally have enough firepower to run an A/B experiment, right? Or experimentation, period. You don't need a full army of people to do that, which we'll cover in a second about how you can do that. So here you go, right? So for folks across different organizations, so let's say you're an early product with very limited engineering bandwidth and no dollars. For you, the simplest absolute way to run experimentation is to build, let's say, a simple internal config system, right? Where you run an odd even system. कि अच्छा user ID में कुछ digits हैं, if they're odd, or a certain user parameter, if it's odd, then I'll show him a experiment variable. If it's even, I'm showing something else, something very simple to configure on top of your existing user, user IDs or user parameter. Again, here you're not doing any rollout mechanism. You're not, what you will not have is, let's say, a personal rollout mechanism. So the moment you turn on an experiment, it'll be turned on to all the users with odd user IDs, right? Stuff like that. Now here you can augment this by, let's say, saying, acha, button number 1, it shows my experiment code to all the users with odd user ID. Now I also want to limit it to user in certain cities or in certain which something you already will have in your system. So you can just build a very simple internal config system to manage this, right? No, you don't need some fancy cloud service to manage it. All you need is a simple config system, which can help you do that. The only downside is you may not be able to run a lot of parallel experiments, right? You can limit the scope and all, but you cannot run parallel experiments, and all the analysis work will have to be done by you. Again, there are 3 tools for that. You can check out this link later, but this is the approach to go when you're very early product who's seeing decent traction, but you want to just start going with experimentation. If you have some engineering bandwidth, which is type B setup, right? This is where you can integrate an open source solution like Unleash, right? I've seen this being very successful in my current organization and some previous places I consulted with, where you can integrate something like this very quickly, is highly customized, secure, and you can get running with a very limited budget, right? Budget here is essentially just your server cost, and your engineer is going to be working on it. And the third phase is when you have a decent experimentation budget, organization is pretty stable, great traction, right? This is where you can integrate your tools like Apo, Aptitude, Optimizely, all the stuff. What they give you is your ability to customize the experiment, roll them out to specific audiences, analyze results in real time, so that all you have to do is configure and just go live and keep monitoring the dashboard. But obviously, the catch here being that they'll cost a bunch of dollars, and there could be some concern around data security if you're a fintech organization, right? So this is how it is. So far, what we covered is why experimentation is not just about UI, minor UI changes. What is the value of experimentation as a PM that you carry in any organization? Why you should fight for it? And what value, how big organization, I mean, utilizing them. This is how we can get started with it, right? Next is what we'll, sorry. Cool. Next, I'll cover essentially when I went through this entire journey myself in Big Basket, what is the end outcome for it in a couple of experiments that I ran, right? So this coming back to the same experiment. So this was the address-cation experiment I was talking about. So this was the initial design, which was a very form-based approach. We had 30 to 40% drop-offs. We focus, the growth team, we focus on, hey, how can we kind of not have 40% which just drop on this stupid step? We rehashed it, ran the first time experiment, as you saw it earlier, saw 43% improvement, net improvement, while 31% people were facing errors in that flow, right? So despite 31% people facing errors, 43% more people were completing this flow. And I said, okay, this looks great. And we were able to go live with 1 month of integration effort, but there's something that can be done better, right? So once we made the fixes, this is what we ended up with. We ended up with 70% improvement, relative improvement in people filling up their address, and errors actually reduced by 36%, right? The number of errors people are facing current product, and in the new product, they actually reduce, right? So this is the beauty of experimentation, right? It allows you to see what is the actual positive impact and where all I can improve the product till the point that I'm confident that, okay, this is the best product that I can launch to all my users, right? So here's a real life example of that in front of you. Here's another example of a multivariate experiment that we ran at Big Basket, just for you to get perspective, right? So essentially, this example is of something called Smart Basket, which we still have. The idea was, hey, how can we make it easier for people to discover this feature in the app, which previously was just a banner on the homepage. So what we did for that is we tried 3 different ideas for people to come to it, 3 different entry points across the homepage and the toolbar and everything. And we tried them in parallelly to see, because we didn't have time. Plus, we wanted to quickly understand which direction we want to go to. So we ran the 3 variants parallelly, saw the impact. And as you can see, in the middle variants showed us the highest uplift in people coming to this page and spending time on it, right? So this is how this whole approach of experimentation helped me kind of, and for perspective, by the way, guys, this was something which was, everyone knew that they had to solve this problem, but it was just in the back burner for like 2 to 3 years when this, for instance, since they built this whole module, because too risky for anyone to try without experimentation, because anything you try, it will take them more than 15 days to roll it back because of the Apple launch cycle, right? So it was an opportunity that the business knew that we want to solve this opportunity, but it's just that the risk was so high that no one tried attempting it, right? So experimentation solved that for us, and within 1 month we had the right answer, and we had 95% more users exploring this product and making us more money, right? Something we could not have imagined earlier. Awesome. Before we go into details of how to design the experiments and everything, on the protocol for that, just want to quickly double tap on these 2 things, that don't look at this as a silver bullet. Experimentation is not very scenario. These are a couple of those 101 scenarios where, for example, if you don't have enough users, you are a very 0 to 1 organization. Generally, the rule of thumb is 10,000 active daily users. If you're less than that, please don't try experimentation. It may not work out. Just go with the change that you want to make, see the net impact, and then take the call, right? Because you would not, even if you use experimentation, you would not be able to statistically get confidence on whether this idea makes sense or no to roll out, right? So might as well just roll it out to all users. and see, right? But still, if you think you are somewhere in between, try to optimize for experiment which have a bigger impact, right? Instead of just button color changes, think of ideas which could, let's say, about layout, changing the layout of the whole page or itself, or doing a different integration altogether on the page to understand to see a bigger swing in your metrics instead of minor changes here and there, right? And other scenario where this kind of approach doesn't make sense is when you're making the changes which cannot be tested, right? A good example is Airbnb's brand revamp, right? This is not something you can experiment. Once you change identity, you tell the entire world about it, right? Or when you have very limited business runway. Let's say you have good traction, but you don't have enough money in the bank. So would you go to your founder and say, boss, I know you have just 2 months of runway in your bank. Can we still run this experiment? No. At that point, you should just commit to an approach, try it out, and then see if it works, and then decide whether you want to go forward with it. So these are scenarios where you should not be thinking of experimentation. You just go with your thesis and let it play out, and then decide which approach, which direction you need to go, right? Yes, and when you are in that scenario, what do you do? Because do you still, let's say you have less than 5,000 daily users and you want to try something, should you still go, should you just roll out things to everyone? No, I think there again, the thing I generally recommend is use feature flags. This is something you'll hear from engineering managers a lot. Engineering team uses a lot for to control their feature rollouts and all, right? So uh, try piggybacking on things like these. In a feature flag will let you essentially allow you to add a switch to any change you are making, right? So if things go sideways, even for all the users, let's say you've enabled something for all of the users, right? If you don't have a kill switch, you don't have a control switch, or if you don't have customization to, hey, can I launch it one by one to different markets, then if anything goes sideways, you have to wake up an entire night to fix it, right? So sure, if you're not able to run experiment because of other scenarios, please consider using a feature flag, which are essentially remote plugs that can work in any environment. For the especially for the app-based products, this is a lifesaver, because you cannot do an app release instantly, right? Even if you do it instantly, it takes 15 days for people to get to the new version. But you have a feature flag integrated in the backend, you can turn things on and off whenever you want, basis the real time impact, right? Awesome. Here in this next section, Alice, do you want to take a quick break for take questions, or should we keep going? Because this, I think, is a deeper.
I think we should keep going, Nimit. We'll take the question towards the end.
All right, cool. Arvind, I think you have something. Would you mind waiting for us to close this out? Thanks. All right. I hope you are with me so far. It was not too heavy. I'll take questions to, iron out any gaps that I might have left in my conversation so far. But the next space is where I want to quickly cover the 101 steps for you to design A/B experiments, if you are convinced with this approach so far, right? The first one here being whenever you see an opportunity, or you are given an opportunity ki yaar isko improve kar, whatever, the first thing you should do is figure out your riskiest assumptions, right? This is where I see 99% of the candidates I interview or people I worked with fail, right? They just go with, all right, here's the experiment you want to do. Let's just start building it out, right? Now, what differentiates a good PM from a great PM is your ability to figure out कि अच्छा ये हर idea में सारे assumptions, every idea is based on assumptions, right? First realizing that, and then realizing there are two set of assumptions where you may prove out to be wrong, right? But they would not break your product, right? And then the assumptions which are very critical. If they break, if your assumption breaks there, then your whole product module breaks, right? So step one is to be humble enough to take a step back, figure out what you're trying to do, and figure out the riskiest piece in it. कि अगर ये break हो जाता है, nothing else will matter. मेरा great design, मेरा great activation, GTM marketing कुछ नहीं work करेगा अगर ये चीज एक break हो जाती है, right? So this is part one. Part two is, oh yeah, this is a bonus slide for it. I added it, right? So I've just added some Easter eggs across the deck. So essentially, when you figured out your risky assumptions and started thinking of solutions, you can keep this spectrum in mind with something I bought from Reforge, wherein you can think on the spectrum of whether you're trying to simplify a current product work or you're trying to reinvent it, right? So think which spectrum you need to think on, whether whatever problem you're working on, does it need you to reinvent it, or does it need you to simplify it, or does it need you to just restructure it right now, right? Because if you're not cognizant of which part of spectrum are you on, you might overcommit and underinvest, or you overinvest and overinvest in an idea which is, let's say, just about simplification, which just needs a simplification. So the key thing is to be very aware that, hey, mera jo problem statement, what does it need me to do? And correspondingly figure out which bucket it falls for you in terms of effort that you have to invest in it, and how much weight you need to add to it when you're talking to your CXOs and all, right? So this is one thing to be cognizant about. Cool, awesome. Very quickly, the second piece that matters especially to the B2C products is storyboarding. I think most of the people just end up, hey, here's an experiment, let's just start typing the PRD and then give it to designers, they'll figure out the experience, and then you say, boss, let's just ship it, right? So as a PM, I think you should have the chops to actually storyboard the user experience on your own. And when I storyboard, I'm not saying design, I'm saying just visualize the experience so that you can get full handle on what scenarios to cover, what scenario you might not have thought of before. Oftentimes, what I've seen when I storyboard, I feel, oh, this is a bad idea, this is a bad approach, because यहाँ से तो अच्छा लग रहा है, this part में अच्छा लग रहा है, but ये चीज यहाँ पे break हो रही है, right? यहाँ पे break हो रही है, इसका मतलब I have to rethink the first part to make sure it's cohesive, or I have to rethink how if I need more engineering bandwidth to make this work, right? So this is the second piece that I highly recommend, that before even pitching or thinking of experiment, storyboard it. These are a couple of tools that can help you get started very fast on it. For instance, this storyboard is for the location experiments I talked about, which led us to have 80% uplift in people adding addresses on Big Basket, right? This is what I use to align all my engineering, design, leadership around it. Ki boss, ye hum kar rahe hain. Let's debate. If it doesn't make sense, let's ideate until we get to a point of confidence. Let's not go into execution and designing and everything, right? The third piece is quickly to understand your user cohorts, where the mistake you could do if you don't think about it is, sare users are same. I should just roll it out. Let's see the net impact and be done with it. Aggregate impact kitna ho raha hai, right? यहाँ पे the key piece to keep in mind is you need to understand that not every product feature will impact all of the users the same way. There's some people who will show very positive impact. There's some people who show negative impact, right? So, for example, this feature that I built, there's highly likely that some people would have hated this. Yeah, I don't want this complex. I'm an oldie guy. I like this typing things in and my home address, right? So here the whole thing for you is to be able to gauge ki, acha, what is the 80% bucket? Is my 80% people here, or people going to be here or here, right? And basis that, you take a call that, okay, how risky the experiment is, basis what kind of cohort that, how will different kind of user cohorts react to your change, right? And this is where user research becomes important. This is where talking to business stakeholders very, very important. The other piece becomes metrics. Again, I think we've spoken about it a little earlier, but just double tapping on this, where you need any experiment you look at in your career, you look at people talking about bands, right? This is just an example where essentially the question to you would be, "Acha, you're trying this feature. What is your confidence level on that?" Right? Even though they're not thinking, they not confident, they'll ask, "Kitna impact aayega?" Right? That's a simple lingo that CEOs talk in terms of, right? Now, what you have to figure out is, hey, how do I communicate that? How do I think through that? Okay, mera ye experiment ka impact metrics hai, and what impact metric hai, and what is the potential, what is the possibility that I could have a positive or negative impact on each of these scenarios, which are no impact, positive impact, and definite impact. So if I was running experiment, I will see that, okay, मेरा confidence है कि इस पर definitely impact आएगा, और आएगा तो कितना positive आएगा, कितना negative आ सकता है, right? So this is how you kind of simulate different scenarios for your experiment. Idea is just to be sure that you have thought through how well you have designed this whole feature, and if this goes sideways, how bad can go, and if you have low confidence, should you prioritize something else on top of it, right? But that will only come when you have really thought through each and every metric which could possibly be impacted because of your change, right? The second last piece here is about the duration of experiment. Now here I wanted to introduce the idea of statistical significance. So early in the presentation I mentioned scientific is something we'll double tap on. This is that part, right? So we'll start discussing that in the next couple of slides. So any experiment you run, it will, whether that experiment का जो result आ रहा है is reliable or not will be gauged by something called statistical significance. It is a statistics का term wherein essentially you can read up online. I'll give you some links in a while. But essentially, it's a score which is on a percentage scale. So if it says you have 95% statistical significance, which means that if you're seeing a 10% uplift in an experiment right now, there's a 95% probability that if you roll out your feature to all the users, you'll see the same impact or similar impact. But if your statistical significance is 50%, उसका मतलब है कि यार 50% chance है कि तुम्हारा जो change है, it will show you the same impact in the life. It could go negative as well. So अगर अभी plus 70% impact दिख रहा है मुझे इस address change का, when I roll out to all users, plus 70 could become maybe minus 7%. Who knows, right? So as AB experiment professionals, we look at, oh, हमारा statistical significance कोई भी experiment should be minimum 95%. So that's the benchmark we generally use. So this slide is essentially about to get to the 95% statistical significance, you have to figure out कितना देर तक मुझे experiment चलाना है, because that's how you generate more data for your model to figure out statistics. This is the simple calculators for you to kind of use that. If you have a deep analytics guy on your team, you can let him do it as well. But this is some quick ways for you to do that on your own. This is a low math approach. If you don't want to do a very deep approach, you can just get these proxy that I've seen work out very well in any scenario, where just pick 10 days. Right? Say कि कोई भी experiment करूँगा छोटा बड़ा deep, I'll give it at least 10 days and start with the rule of 10, right? Start for 10 days, start with 10% audience and keep monitoring your statistical significance until you get to 95%, until you get 95% or more for 3 to 5 days, right? So this is a real life actual dashboard, statistical significance dashboard experiment I was running, where if you see this curve hit 95%, almost 95% for a day, and then it start dripping, right? So for this scenario, I said, boss, this experiment is now ready to go live to all the users. Let's just hold it. Second experiment, as you see, it was a 99.99% statistical confidence from day one itself, right? So I was very confident that the results I'm seeing here for this experiment on the right is good. We can safely roll it out and the impact metrics will be the same when you roll out all these. So this is just one thing. Keep in mind. The last thing is to whatever you do, try to keep at least 20K users, depending on a scale. It could be 10, it could be even 15K, but try to keep sizable number of users in each variant before you conclude the experiment and decide कि सबको roll out करना है या नहीं करना है. These are some advancing. I think we're running a little short on time, so I'll skip these. I think Aris, you'll be sharing this deck, so you can go through this in much more detail. So I'll actually cover some critical parts now, which is things like, so everyone has fun shipping features, right? Not just experiment in your general PM career. Let's roll out, let's build, right? The key maturity comes out when you plan what happens post the rollout, right? So in experimentation space, in regular PM rollouts, sure, you may skip that. But when you're running an experiment, it becomes especially important that you plan out for these three scenarios early on the day one itself. Ki agar ye experiment chalta hai as expected, what will I do next? If it does not turn out, if it turns out inconclusive, कि मुझे समझ में नहीं आ रहा है कि this is positive, negative, what will I do next? Or third, if I see negative, what will I do next? Right? Now, why are these three scenarios super important for you to figure out, spec out on day one and discuss with the engineering team, discuss with product leadership team? Because when you're running experiment, by definition, you're going to be trying things which are not super polished. You're not going to be spending 3 months to build a product feature experiment. You're probably going to spend a weekend to try out a quick prototype to test it out in the wild, right? Now, those most likely that experiment module that you build is not ready for all the users. It's not going to perform at scale, or it may not serve all your edge cases, or may not work really well with your support system, whatever. There's bound to be some gaps in that experiment design, right? So you on day one itself, your engineering, your design, your leadership, your ops team would need to know कि you're running a very quick experiment, very limited features. जब तुम उसको conclude कर लोगे तो क्या करोगे? So that we can be prepared on our own. So engineering might say, okay, fine, I'll be ready with a scalable infra if it goes positive, or if it goes negative, you can say, hey, design team, please be ready to do user research. If there's negative impact, we might need to call these people quickly and figure out what's happening, right? So all this prepping and thinking needs to be done early on. And if you miss this, trust me, you will not be able to run experiments more than a quarter. You'll instantly start losing trust with the stakeholders, or you feel burnt yourself. Now I'm suddenly hot soup. Because regardless of how great you are, for every 10 experiments, you might have just 3 hits or 2 hits, right? The rest 8 is some things you'll have to absorb them, manage them, and keep the team morale and bandwidth management working through those rest 8 failures, right? So this is the last piece I wanted to kind of cover on. Finally, the promised land where you launch the AB experiment and you're enjoying the sweet fruit of your labor. This is again a deep slide on the statistical significance. I think we covered it again. You can look at it later, but the whole idea is whatever, you don't have to go deep into statistics as PMs, but whatever approach, whether you are using enterprise tool to calculate for you, or you're calculating your online calculator, or you're letting your data product analyst do that, always keep an eye on statistical significance. I would suggest so you read on it, understand what it means. You don't need to go very deep into it, but make sure you fully understand this idea so that everything you do is circling around it. Even a stakeholder conversation, you need to mention this. Ki boss, they might ask you, why have you not rolled out the experiment to all users? You need to tell them, I need more time because my statistical significance is still at 80% and is climbing slowly, right? For whatever reason, right? So this is some concept you need to keep in mind quite importantly. This is again an advanced concept once you're really into put your hands dirty with experiments, is the idea of exclusivity, wherein what if multiple PMs on the team are running experiments? What if you're running multiple experiments, right? Sometimes you would want that, you want a scenario like this on the right, where you want ki, acha, if users are in group 1, if I'm allocated some users in experiment type 1, they should not see the type 2 variant. Like you're running experiment checkout flow and you're also running an experiment on the home page, you wouldn't want, in some scenarios, you would be okay. Yeah, there could be some people in the center who are seeing both type of new changes, right? Other scenario, you might say, yeah, I am optimized for order conversion, so I don't want to have a single user see both the changes. कि वो होम पेज का भी चेंज देख रहा है और चेकआउट फ्लो का भी चेंज देख रहा है. I would rather want to see their impact separately and then launch them together and see the collective impact, right? So this is where the idea of exclusivity comes in. Again, my intent here is just to give you this key term to keep in mind. You can research more, learn more about it. But exclusivity is again very pivotal concept to keep in mind when you're thinking of experiments, when analyzing different experiment stacks, or when you're launching experiments. Do you want it to be exclusive? Every system will ask you, do you want to be exclusive or do you want to be non-exclusive? I mean, exclusive or you don't care. You're not, so you end up with something like this where you have mixed set of users. But you're exclusive. Generally, my approach is always keep things exclusive so that there's no mix up in results. But now, hoga kya ki, if I'm comparing the impact of group number 1 here in this scenario, who knows if this is because of group 2 experiment type 2 is pushing the metrics really, in a better way, right? So don't want mixed results. That's why I generally prefer exclusivity, but that's just as a concept you should keep in mind. Again, a deeper slide on exclusivity. How do you see in different protocol, different tools? There's actually a checkbox around it. You keep in mind. Lastly, I think here it's just about how do you, if you are someone who's joining an organization who does not have a culture of experimentation, here are some ways how you can develop, how can you get the organization behind the culture, experimentation culture, and build credo for yourself, right? So step 1, generally I would suggest is start with low hanging fruits. Figure out small opportunities, because organization does not understand experiment. They want to invest, they want to risk too much. So you want to start with low hanging fruits, show them the reward, show them that this thing actually works, right? Then step 2 is to demonstrate ki, hey CEO, every CX or every organization, if they've been around for more than a year, they will have some ideas in the bucket list which are very high risk, high reward, but they never could try it because the risk is too high. Ki agar fatega to who will take care of it, right? How will you load it back? How will the brand image will be tampered, right? So I think this is where you can get your in. Talk to CX, so understand what ideas they've been sitting on their head and try to tell them, hey, you know what? I can actually try it out for you in a very simple way with no risk, no impact on the brand image. And then we can decide whether it works for us. So become buddies with them in this angle. And then step 3 is once you've crossed the second milestone, which is become their buddies in discussing high risk, high reward ideas and proposing a way to test them on a low risk fashion, create a way for people to submit their ideas across the org, right? Become that node who is the person to understand all the experimentative ideas and letting people unleash that creativity in a controlled fashion using A/B experimentation. So become that. And step 4 is the 4th level where you start training people in designing tests. Step 3, maybe you're designing for them and launching on your own using your. Step 4, you become so mature A training then ki boss, देखो, this is my template to design an experiment. This is how you run the metrics. This is how you check the statistical significance. Go do it on your own. And that is when you approach, when you get to a leadership level across your organization, and everyone understands, boss, these are the thought leaders for experimentation, but they're also empowering us to do experiments on our own, right? Cool. I mean, these are the additional pointers that you can keep in mind when you're actually starting experimentation. Again, something you can use a reference when you are going deeper into this in your career. This is something I'll just quickly would want to cover, because it will matter a lot in how you're thinking about which experiments to take care, which experiments to pursue and which not to pursue, right? And how to find your opportunity. Because most likely when you join your organizations, when you transition or you step up from SPM to above or PM to above, most likely they'll just give you a problem space. Here, ये problem hai, you come back with ideas, right? So here, one thing to keep in mind is something like this, right? People, for example, when you think of metrics to impact, right? You Let's say pick retention for the matter. Right? Retention is a very lagging metric, right? We think of, okay, how can I run an experiment to increase retention? Then we think of random ideas and see, okay, iska impact 3 महीने बाद आएगा D90 retention में, D60 retention में, right? Now, what is the right way? Because when you're running experiments, you can't wait for 90 days to see the impact. You have to run it for 2 weeks. Uh, 2 weeks or whatever, and decide whether you want to roll it or not. So here, the 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 way to handle this situation where your target metric is a very lagging metric, takes a lot of time to develop, is to figure out some input metrics, right? Figure out, for example, LinkedIn's case, you should read this blog where they figured out that long-term retention has a very high correlation with quality sign-up rate. Basically, when people are signing up to LinkedIn, if they're giving you their full image, uploading their image, they're uploading some bio, that means that they'll be retaining much better down the line, right? So as an experiment team, they didn't need to actually, their target metric for the experiment was never retention. They just optimize for quality sign up. Abhi jab people are signing up, can we incentivize them to sign up really well? Because there's a high correlation with them retaining with us in long term, right? So this is one piece to keep in mind, that when you're chasing metrics which are very far in the future, which are not as quick as conversion metrics, you should think of proxies who can help you figure out कि अच्छा ये impact कभी कर दूंगा, but definitely they're going to be positive impact on this metric down the line. And similarly, the second piece is the second thing on the right is essentially when you're looking at very big metrics, you're challenged with कि Amazon का, let's say, conversion rate, order volume बढ़ाओ. Now you'll be like, your hands will start to like burn up. Hey, there's a big problem. How do I think about it? Where do I get started? So don't worry, don't get started with randomly thinking of ideas and throwing ideas. Start breaking down the metric into this kind of a tree where you look at this, okay, times in Spotify's case, time spent listening to music can be broken down to these mathematical pieces, right? Either you bring more people back, you can increase it only by these two pieces. There's nothing else that you can change. This can be broken down to something else. Then you can figure out, acha, you know what? I can experiment on this part or this part or this part. So it become a much more action. You convert a big giant metric into small actionable areas for you, and then it becomes a more manageable thing, space for you to experiment with. And then you also know kitna impact you can drive where and build a roadmap around it, right? Cool. Again, these are just a bunch of mistakes that I've seen in the past during my experimentation career. You can just, these are self-explanatory. I think I'll just go the last one here, which is summing up the net impact. It's the biggest mistake. People think I've run 4 experiments, all of them are individually 10% uplift. So in the quarter, if I launch all of the experiments, I see 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10, aisa nahi hota hai, right? If you're seeing essentially 10% uplift across all the experiments, you'll end up in the net seeing, let's say, 40%, you probably see 15% net impact, right? So experimentation is not arithmetic science. It's not arithmetics कि यहाँ पे 4% यहाँ से आया, 5% आया. It gets normalized a bit when you launch the pieces together, because the reality is that when people see multiple changes in the product together, they actually behave in a different way. They just don't work, their minds don't work in a very incremental fashion, right? So that's the last piece I wanted to cover, and awesome, that's it. Sorry, I crossed the timeline a bit, but yeah, I hope you had a good time. Getting the basics. Aris, what do you?
Oh, that was super fun, Nimit.
Glad to be here. Cool. Awesome.
Thanks so much, folks, for joining us. Have a lovely weekend ahead. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Have a great weekend, everyone.